Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, from whichever part of the world you are joining. And welcome to VizConnect, connecting you with the art of data visualization and storytelling. So, VizConnect is all about how we can go ahead and connect people with the best practices, tips, and with respect to data visualization and storytelling. VizConnect started last year with the help of one of the Tableau ambassador, Divya Bharti. And now we have a team of 4 people, Adam, Lucius, Judith, and we're going and helping the community to go ahead and connect you with the Tableau Zen masters and masters. So, so far we have done close to 40 sessions now. We have a YouTube page in which all the sessions are recorded. And we have a LinkedIn community in which you can go ahead and connect with everyone. And this has been possible with these amazing speakers who are kind enough to come and talk on the VizConnect community. So this is our YouTube page by the name of VizConnect. Go ahead, subscribe to it. Some amazing sessions over here for them. Just and this is our LinkedIn page. Just go ahead, join it, talk to each other, get inspired, and learn from each other. That's important. So coming back to the speaker today, so it took me around 9 months to go ahead and bring Ken Flerlage to VizConnect. I met him in the Tableau conference last year, and we discussed about like Ken should go ahead and present in VizConnect. So Ken, thank you for coming on VizConnect. Just to talk about Ken. So Ken is an analytics architect, strategist, and evangelist with over 20 years of experience in information technology. He's an assistant director of data analytics at Bucknell University. He's an active member of the Tableau community and a 3-time Zen master. He spends a lot of his time answering questions on the forums, engaging in data visualization and discussion, and blogging on flirts.com. And the fun fact about him is that he is as an identical twin for the Ken Flerlage, who everyone knows now as a Tableau Zen master also. So with that, Ken, over to you.
All right. Oops.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Good. All right. Let me switch here. All right. Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, it took 9 months, but I'm excited to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. So I'm going to be talking about Tableau's new data model today, as Sagar mentioned. But before that, he just gave a quick introduction, so I don't think I need to review this page, but I've got my Twitter handle here and our website here. So if you want to get in contact with me, you can use one of those. So and here's just sort of a quick snapshot of my work, some of my work. So if you want to see some of my additional work, certainly you can check out the website or take a look at my Tableau public page for more. So as Sagar mentioned, I am an identical twin, and I know this group has heard from Kevin a couple of times, I think, at this point in time. So just to be clear on who's who, this is Kevin. In a lot of his presentations, and I'm guessing in one of the presentations he gave for you, he likes to make the claim that he's the handsome twin. I don't know that I agree with that, but I'll give him that because I'm the smart one. And Kevin started using Tableau a couple of years ago. I had already been using Tableau for a couple of years at that point, and he's done some really good stuff and gotten really good with the product. But just to make sure that everyone is 100% clear, I taught Kevin everything he knows about Tableau. So I'll take credit for all the great presentations he's done for you so far. In all seriousness, Kevin's been using Tableau for just over 2 years, and pretty amazing what he's done. And to have become a Zen in that short period of time is pretty amazing. So him and I, we talk a lot and we collaborate a lot. And he had started the blog shortly after starting to work with Tableau. And last year we started talking, and we found that people were constantly getting us confused. People would reach out to me and say, ask me a question about a blog Kevin had written, and vice versa. And we said, why are we maintaining separate blogs? Why are we doing this at all? So we decided to come together, join forces, and we started the Flerlage Twins blog. You know, all of our content is on this one blog, everything we've done in the past, and we try to publish new content about once every week or so. And so check out the blog if you're not familiar with it. Hopefully a lot of really great content there, including a blog about the new data model. So everything I'm going to be sharing today is on my blog, and here's the URL. I'd encourage people, if you're planning on taking notes or any of that kind of thing, don't worry about doing that. Just grab this URL and listen and just get the information, and then you can always go back and read the blog, or as you know, since this is being recorded, you can always go back and watch the presentation again, right? So when I do presentations about Tableau and analytics, you know, a lot of times I'm talking about these really crazy and exciting things. For example, when Kevin and I presented at Tableau conference last year, we talked about building custom charts. So we talked about building things like radial bar charts and radar charts and Sankey's, and we went through all the details and the basic fundamental things you need to know in order to build those. And that was kind of sexy and exciting. The new data model, maybe not quite as sexy as some of those topics, but I'll argue that it's probably more important. You know, Tableau has, with this new data model, has fundamentally changed the way the product works. And it's really important, in my opinion, for Tableau users and data analysts that are using Tableau to understand the impact that this has on the platform and how they use it moving forward. So, you know, again, not an incredibly sexy topic, but I think really critical and important. And hopefully you gain some new knowledge from this presentation today. So before we start to talk about the new data model, I think it's really important to understand the old data model and how the old data model works. So this is the data model prior to 2020.2, which is the current release. I like to think about the old data model as this sort of grumpy old man set in his way, doesn't like to change too much. So we're all familiar with this screen, probably, right? This is what the old data model looked like. You would bring in tables. So in this case, I'm using Superstore, and I've brought in my orders table and my people table, and I've performed a inner join on the region field, right? So we get this Venn diagram showing the type of join, and we specify our join fields. And the thing about the old data model is, for the most part, when you establish these joins, you establish this model, you're sort of establishing the basic SQL that's being passed to the database. So I mentioned SQL. I should note that we are going to be talking a little bit about the SQL that's being produced in this. If you're not real familiar with SQL, that's okay. This isn't going to be terribly complicated SQL, but it's really important in understanding how the new data model works. It's really important to understand the SQL that's being created and how it's communicating back to the database, because that's really the critical difference in the new data model. So as I said, this is establishing some SQL that's going to sort of be used throughout the rest of your analysis as you're building charts. And the SQL that we get for this is something like this. It's select from orders, join to people based on the region table, right? So it's a fairly simple SQL statement, but this is going to become sort of the foundation of everything else that we're doing as we build charts in Tableau with the old data model. So let's take a look at an example. So here we have a simple bar chart showing sales by customer. And the thing I want to point out is that customer and sales are both coming from the order table. We're not using any fields from the people table in this example. But the sequel we get looks something like this. So select customer name, sum of sales from orders, interjoin to people based on region, group by customer. So even though we haven't used any fields from the people table, we're still getting this inner join to the people table. And that's because, as I said before, when we establish this data model, it's establishing sort of the foundational SQL that it's going to build, and it's always going to include that join. Now, there are a couple of ways that you can avoid this in the old data model. You can change some settings regarding referential integrity, but generally speaking, you're always going to get this join in your SQL, even if you don't need it. So that sort of reveals one key problem with the old data model, is that it's often going to create these unnecessary joins that you don't really need. And that can lead to some performance issues. If you have a bunch of joins in there that aren't necessary, then it's just not going to perform in the same way as a more efficient SQL statement. So another potential problem we have with the old data model has to do with duplicate records. So this is the basic structure of our people table that we've used so far. We have one record for one person for each region, right? But what if we did a people table like this? So this is my people multiple table. And people multiple has 2 people for each region. So we have 2 people for Central, 2 people for East, etc. So we would, in the old data model, we would do the same sort of join, right? We bring in orders, we bring in people multiple and join based on the region table. Now, this looks exactly like the other join that we performed, right? And you might not really realize that there's even a difference. And the SQL statement looks very similar as well, right? It's a select from orders and join to people based on the region. But what happens is, because we have these multiple people for each region, we end up duplicating our data. So with the regular people table, we have about 10,000 records. But when we join to the people multiple table, we end up with about 20,000 records. So those orders, each one of those orders is being duplicated because of the fact that there are multiple people. And those of us who have used Tableau and are experienced with Tableau are used to dealing with this, and we tend to be aware of this up front. And we know that we need to use level of detail calculations to sort of address those duplicate records. But to me, this is a real problem particularly for new people or people that aren't as experienced with Tableau, because they may not realize that they've duplicated their data. They may not do the checks to look for that situation. And that can, if they were to just drag in the sales or the profit, they're going to duplicate that number. So this is a really sort of, to me, it's a dangerous problem, because it can really lead to people doubling up on the measures and misreporting their numbers. So that to me is really problematic, and something I would, I'm hopeful that we can address. So ultimately, we have sort of these 3 key disadvantages. There are certainly other disadvantages, but in my mind, these are sort of 3 key disadvantages of the old data model. One is that the unnecessary joins, which, as I said before, can lead to a performance impact and cause things to just run more slowly because of inefficient SQL. We've got the possibility of duplicate records, which, as I mentioned, can cause people to overstate their numbers. And because of that, it forces us to use level of detail calculations to limit the impact of duplicate records. And for those of us who are experienced and have been using Tableau for a long time, those LODs are relatively simple for us. But for new people, it's a difficult concept to grasp. And ideally, it would be nice for these types of basic analyses if we didn't need to use them at all. So our hope is that the new data model will help to address some of these key issues, right? So let's talk about the new data model. So I like to imagine the new data model as this sort of new kid in town, right? He's he's flexible and willing to change, much more so than the old grumpy old man that we met before. And this was introduced in 2020.2, which is the current release of Tableau. Many of you probably are not on this release yet, but at some point your servers and your organizations will get upgraded to it. So the new data model looks a little bit differently, and I want to spend a few minutes sort of talking through some of the terminology that we'll be using with the new data model. So the first thing I'll point out is the noodle here. We no longer have Venn diagrams. We just have this sort of connection point, and we call this the noodle. And then this box is where we create the relationships. We have a relationship on region here, and we can add more fields if needed. Now, this area here is called the logical layer. So these aren't real tables. They're sort of logical tables, right? So each of these is called a logical table. Now, I can also get into the physical layer. So if I double click on these, it'll take me into a physical layer. So the physical layer is pretty much just the old data model, right? We can join tables over here. So this is physical layer, and this is a physical table. Again, this is just basically the old data model. We can pull tables in, do the old-fashioned joins, just like we always used to, and specify the join type and all those types of things. So in fact, if you open up a old workbook in 2020.2, what you'll get is that it's just taken your whole data model and forced it into the physical layer, and it creates one logical table called migrated data. So you do have these sort of separate layers, and you can use them both, right? So I could build a bunch of joins in the physical layer, bring that up to a logical table, and then create relationships to other logical tables. And there are situations where you might want to use the physical layer in addition to the logical layer. It does create a little bit of confusion, though, of which layer you should be working in. I think generally speaking, try to use the logical layer and avoid drilling into the physical layer if you can. And I think over time, hopefully we get to the point where almost all of our modeling we're doing right within the logical layer. All right, so coming back to our setup here. So just like our join with the old data model, we've set up this. We've brought in our orders table and our people table, and we've created this relationship on region. So the key difference with the new data model is instead of sort of creating a base foundational SQL statement that is used throughout our workbook, Tableau now sort of creates this SQL on the fly. So I like using the term, it's a smart SQL, right? It's going to understand the fields that are used on the view, and it's going to understand to some degree the nature of the data of the data in the tables, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And it's going to generate a new unique SQL statement every single time, which is pretty cool. And that's part of the reason that we no longer have that Venn diagram here, is because we don't need to specify that anymore. We don't have to tell it what type of join to do. We just sort of specify this loose relationship between the region fields, and then Tableau figures out how to do the joins, whether it's going to be an inner join, a left join, or whatever. We don't have to worry about that anymore. So I think this is a really good thing for new people coming to Tableau. I see a lot of new people in Tableau who will always just select the full outer join because they don't really know any better, and that's sort of the safe option to make sure that they're not losing any data. And in this case, they don't need to think about that anymore. They just need to think about what are those fields that connect these tables, and then create that connection and let Tableau do the rest. So I think that's an exciting change that's going to make everyone's lives a little bit easier. So let's look again at our bar chart. So here's our customer and sales bar chart. Remember that customer and sales both come from just the orders table. Now, while I'm here, I do want to point out that when you're using the new data model, you're going to see something a little bit different over here with our fields. By default, it's going to group each table separately. So we'll have our orders table and our dimensions, and then the orders table and its then the order table's measures, and then we'll have the people table dimensions and then the people table measures. And you can change it to grouping by folder, and that allows you a little bit more flexibility in how you arrange these things. But just something to be aware of when you start using the new data model, because it's a little bit different organization. So back to our bar chart. Again, we have just customer and sales here. Both come from the orders table. We're not using the people table at all in this case. And with the new data model, it's going to generate a SQL statement kind of like this. So select customer name, sum of sales from orders, group by customer name. And if we compare that to the old data model, we can see the difference pretty quickly, because the new data model has realized that sure, we've created this relationship to the people table, but our view doesn't use the people table at all. So it has essentially eliminated this join. So this is a concept called join culling. And so when Tableau realizes that join is required, it culls that join, it removes the join, and creates a much more efficient SQL statement that's going to be much more performant. So I think just this simple example hopefully gives you an idea of how this is different and how it's going to create a big impact on the performance of your workbooks as you move forward. All right, so let's take this same bar chart and let's add person, a field from person. So in this case, we've added a filter on person, and so it's now going to need to use that people table in some way. So the SQL statement now looks something like this. And it's basically the same SQL statement as before, except it's realized that we need people, and it's performed that inner join and done a filter on that salesperson. So again, it's only performing the join when it needs to perform the join. And further to that, it's going to perform joins in a smart and intelligent way. And to demonstrate that, let's go back to our people multiple table. So remember the problem this created with the old data model. With the old data model, when we joined this to the orders table, we ended up duplicating our data, and that created a downstream effect of potential overstating of our numbers, the need to do some more advanced calculations to sort of deal with it. So let's look at how the new data model deals with this. So our same bar chart, customer sales, filtering on a person. Let's see what the SQL looks like for this people multiple table. So this is definitely more complex than what we've seen so far. And that's a good thing, right? Because Tableau is realizing sort of the nature of our data and adjusting it for us. So I'm not going to go into detail on what this is doing, but I just want to point out this subquery that is built in here. Tableau has realized that this table is going to create that sort of duplicate record scenario. So what it's done is it's created this subquery that basically filters on the person, returns the region, and then it performs this inner join back to our main orders table. And by doing that, it's eliminating the duplication of our records. So we can see this is the wrong term. It's not a join, it's a relationship, but we can see with our people table that we have about 10,000 records, and with our people multiple table, we have about 10,000 records. So smart SQL, that sort of custom generated SQL that it's building for us, has this intelligence to be able to deal with that situation. So we no longer need to worry about overstating our numbers. We no longer have to worry about creating LOD calculations to eliminate the impact of those duplicates, because the data model is taking care of that for us. And to me, that's super exciting, right? Because it's going to make our lives a lot easier, and is certainly going to help new people to learn the platform and be able to leverage it without getting into these sort of complicated level of detailed calculations. So while I'm here, I want to point out one thing, that we no longer have a number of records field. Instead, what Tableau gives us is a count field for each of our tables. And that's because it's generating, this new SQL every time. There is no sort of standard number of records. Now, if you want, you can create a sort of artificial number of records field. You can just do a custom calculated field and just put the value of 1 in there, and that will sort of act as a number of records. In fact, that's always what number of records has been. It's always was just a calculated field with 1 in it. Just be aware that because it's generating custom SQL every time, that's dependent on what's on your view, that number of records is going to result in different numbers every time. Number of records for something that just had orders in it, you're going to get this 10,000 number. If you did a number of records on something that just had people in it, you're going to get the number of records in the people table. So just be aware of that, but it's easy enough to recreate that yourself. So let's step back and let's look and talk about our old data model disadvantages again here. So number one was it can lead to unnecessary joins. And I think we saw in the examples that I showed that because of the way Tableau is generating the SQL, because of the join culling mechanism that is built into it, it's going to eliminate those unnecessary joins for the most part. And that's going to have a really nice performance impact as we're creating more efficient SQL and only pulling the data we really need at a given time. It could create duplicate records, as we've just seen. Tableau's intelligence that's built into the new data model is eliminating these duplicate records for the most part. I'm not going to guarantee that that's always going to be the case. So I think you need to be wary of your data and keep an eye on it. But generally speaking, the intelligence and the understanding of our tables and the structure of those tables are going to help to eliminate those duplicate records. And because of the elimination of those duplicate records, we no longer are going to need to use LODs to limit the impact of those. Now, LODs are still really, really powerful and have tons of use cases. In fact, I've got a blog called 20 Use Cases for LODs that, and I think only one of them is addressed by the new data model. So there are a ton of great use cases for LODs, but this most sort of fundamental one of dealing with duplicate records is going to be largely addressed by the new data model. So to me, these are fantastic, and they really open up a whole new world for us. And I think there are sort of 3 key advantages to the new data model. One is it's easier to use, right? As you're building your data model, as I said before, you don't have to specify the types of joins. You don't have to understand. You don't even have to understand what a join is or how it works, right? And we have people using Tableau that come from all different areas of industry. And I have a background in technology and databases, so when I started using Tableau, these join types just made sense to me, right? But that isn't the case for everybody. And picking the right type of join can be pretty difficult. And often people will choose their own kind of join, as I mentioned before. So it's much easier to use. You really just need to specify how these tables are related, right? Which fields are related, and then let Tableau do the rest. We have greater accuracy. So I think this is largely around the fact that we're eliminating those duplicate records, that we limit the possibility of overstating our numbers because of duplicates. And that's, I think we've all probably done that at some point. And so we have just right out of the box, we get this better accuracy because we don't have to deal with the duplicate records. And generally speaking, I think we're going to see that we can use a single data model for an increased number of use cases. So, with the old data model, you might end up with 3 or 4 different data sources that use the same tables, but are structuring them or joining them in a slightly different way. to deal with certain use cases. But with the flexibility that's built into this new data model, I think we'll find that we can take 2 or 3 or 4 different data sources and sort of consolidate them into a single data model that is able to cover a lot of different use cases. And so I'm excited to see that. And ultimately, that should lead to this being easier to use and more accurate as well, because our end users, that are connecting to those data sources really only have that one data source that they need to think about, and then let Tableau do the rest of it. So I'm excited about this. That said, it's not perfect, right? So there are some limitations today around the new data model, and I think it's important to point these 3 items out. One is that relationships are equality only. There's no inequality relationship, so you can't do a relationship that is not equal to or greater than or less than or those types of things. So that's that. And if you need to do that kind of thing right now, you're probably going to need to push it into the physical layer. There are no relationship calculations. So in the old data model, you can do join calculations. So basically create a calculation on the fly in order to perform that join. There are no relationship calculations today. So if you need to do something like that, you either need to take it down into the physical layer and do those join calculations, or you need to do some data prep ahead of time in order to get the data in the right structure to create that relationship. And then the third item is that it's not supported for certain types of warehouse data modeling methodologies. I'm not going to go into detail on that, but if you check out my blog, there's some links to Tableau documentation at the top. And if you dig into those, you can see some of those methodologies that are not supported yet. So these are some limitations, some things you just want to be aware of as you start using this. But this is only version 1, right? So Tableau does a really, really good job of introducing these new features in a way that allows us to sort of get comfortable with it, and then they really start to build on those and enhance those and make those better. And I fully expect that that's what's going to happen here with the new data model is they're going to embrace this, and they're going to continue to make it better and more powerful and easier to use as we move forward. In fact, I had built this presentation. I'd done this presentation once before, and I built this presentation and had to add a new slide before I presented it because Tableau announced the 2020.3 beta. And if you look at the beta page, or if you've looked at the beta at all, you'll notice that there are some relationship improvements. And I want to sort of call out just these 2 improvements here. One is calculated fields, and the other is inequality operations. So, and those were 2 of the limitations that we have right now. So I'm hoping that these make it to the final 2020.3 release. And if so, we'll be able to create calculated fields to do those relationships. We'll be able to do, not equal to, greater than, those inequality operators. And that eliminates 2 of the really, big limitations that we have of the data model currently. So I'm excited about this. I think this is going to be a game changer for the way we use Tableau. And it's really going to make our lives easier. It's going to make our results more accurate. And it's going to make our workbooks more performant. And those are all really good things. And I'm excited to see where Tableau takes us moving forward. So with that, that's all I have for you today. Once again, here's the URL to the blog if you want to capture that one more time. And then all my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about this or any other thing related to Tableau or data or analytics in general. So with that, I think if we have time, I'm happy to take any questions that we might have.
So, I think thank you for explaining us about the Tableau's new data model. I literally call it ETL on fly, right? You can just go ahead and talk to your data set now with respect to it. So we have a couple of questions for you. Let me just go ahead and read. The first question is, do you have a tip of how to see this SQL being sent to the database?
Yeah, I'm the last time I gave this presentation, I got the same question, and unfortunately, there aren't a lot of great ways to do it, or at least not easy ways to do it. And part of the problem is you have a variety of different data sources, right? And if you're dealing with like a file based or Excel, like Excel or text file based data source, then the way Tableau is communicating to that is a little bit different than sort of a real database. What I do is, most of my work is so I've got this publicly available SQL Server that I've built, and that's what I was using through this. I have a background as a DBA, a SQL Server DBA. So what I do is I put a trace on the database, do my workbook, grab the SQL through that. That's a little bit painful and does require some more advanced database knowledge. The best way to do it, I think, and I don't do this a lot just because I use the database methodology, but I believe if you turn on Performance Recorder in Tableau and then just run your view or update your view, it should capture the SQL within the logging of Performance Recorder and give you a pretty good idea of what's going on that way. I would love to see a functionality where I could just click a button and it would tell me what the SQL is being generated, but that doesn't exist at this point. So maybe at some point we'll see something.
Yeah, thank you, Ken, for that. And the next question is that with edit relationship, is it always going to be a left join?
No, it's not. And I think you saw with some of the examples that I showed before. In fact, I think the examples that I showed, if I'm not mistaken, I think they were always inner joins. Yeah, all the examples I showed were always inner joins. And that's just something that what type of join is going to be determined by the Tableau data model engine. And I think it's probably a variety of different things that are going to determine that. The referential integrity between your tables is going to determine that. I mean, if every record in one table always has a record in another table, then there's really no reason for there to be a left join, right? But when you do have situations where one table has records that aren't in the other table, then you'll start to see those left joins being generated. And I think ultimately, in some cases, that's a really good thing because you can some things that we've done in the past where we might need to create a data scaffold or turn on certain types of data densification or padding features within Tableau, we won't necessarily need to do because of the left join that's sort of built into that. So all of that is going to be done by Tableau. Sometimes it'll be an inner join, sometimes it'll be a left join, sometimes maybe a full outer join. And it's all dependent on what your view really needs as you're building it.
Thank you. And does the new data model still support union?
Yes, it does. You can union. Boy, I'm saying that. Let me check real quick. Let me pull up.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I have tested. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can. So you can union. You can union logical tables as well as union the physical tables as well.
So does the new data model support cross database join?
Yes.
Thank you for that. Just checking it. So how does the view underlying data change with the new data model? So the answer is he had some of the clients complain that they can't see all the data as they use it. Should I repeat it?
Yeah, I don't understand the question.
So the question is, how does the view underlying data change with the new data model? So I can go to a mark and I can just click on view underlying data, right? So with this
Yes.
new data model, how exactly it changed? So that is a question.
That is a good question. I don't actually know. I haven't dug into that enough to know how that is impacted by the new data model. So I would encourage you, download 2020.2 and maybe even install it side by side to whatever your current version is, and create the same view in both, and kind of click around and see how it impacts that, so that you can learn how that's working.
Sure. Thank you, Ken, for that. Do you, like, everyone is asking about data blending? Do you want to talk about that?
About
Like
data,
whether
what?
data blending? So they're asking, does this new data Tableau news data model, does it replace data blending?
Good
And
question.
yeah,
Um, the answer is no, but so I think there are a number of features that we've seen over the last few years that are sort of slowly eliminating the need for data blending. I think there are still use cases for data blending, but I think this new data model does start to eliminate some of those use cases, but not necessarily all of them. So I don't love blending myself, and I try to avoid it in most cases, because what I find in practice is that data blending usually breaks down at some point, right? Usually, if you're using it, you'll eventually hit some limitation that you really just can't overcome. And so I try to tend to avoid it myself, and I'll try a number of different techniques until I get to the point where I just have no other option but to use blending. And I found over the past couple of years, those needs for data blending have really reduced, because of a lot of the great features that Tableau has built into the product, as well as things like Tableau Prep that allow us to prepare our data in a way that where we don't necessarily need that anymore. So I almost always perform joins. One of the use cases in the past for data blending has been avoiding duplicate records. I still historically have joined those and just used the LODs to avoid that situation, because I don't want to run into those walls that I inevitably hit with data blending. But I think this new data model is going to certainly addresses that, and the intelligence of the joins are going to continue to reduce the number of blending use cases. So that's my recommendation: is use the new data model, use some of the other features built into Tableau, and only use blending as a last resort if nothing else works. And my expectation is that we're going to continue to see features that continue to reduce your blending use cases over time.
thank you, Ken, for that. I think just the last question from my end. I think you should share your Tableau journey, right? Like how you exactly started with it, and maybe some. I think it will be great. Some advice for the beginners, how they can go ahead and start their Tableau journey will be great from your side.
Right. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So I've written a blog, I've talked about this a lot, right? And I've done a couple of presentations on it. So certainly if you, I'm trying to think where it is. So I did a presentation called Zero to Zen for one of the data FAM community jam presentations that Tableau sponsored recently. So if you can dig that presentation up, I go into detail about this, and then I provide some ways to sort of master the platform. But I'll share it briefly with you. So I've been using Tableau since 2016, so it's been about 4 years. my background is information technology. I've done a little bit of everything in information technology. I started out as a programmer, got into systems, so ERP and database administration. Spent a lot of years being sort of the guy behind the scenes, keeping things running. And then I think it was 2013 timeframe, I got into analytics, got an opportunity to lead a small analytics team. And we were using a competitive product, but I immediately sort of saw the beauty and the advantage of visualizing data, and was hooked, and knew I had found the area that I really wanted to spend the rest of my career working in, which was analytics and particularly data visualization. So around 2016, I had was looking for a new position, and I had an interview with Bucknell University and learned to use Tableau. And I was familiar with Tableau, meaning that I knew what it was and I knew basically how it worked, but I had never actually used it myself. So when I landed that job, before starting, I thought, well, I can probably learn or teach myself the basics of Tableau before starting so that I can hit the ground running. And so I took an online class on Udemy. I think I paid like $10 for it. And it was taught by Matt Francis, who is well known in the community. He's a former Zen master and has a lot of really good training courses. His content is now mostly on LinkedIn Learning, and he's constantly creating updated content. So I took that class and went through it in about a week and learned the basics of Tableau and thought I was in good shape to kind of get going when I started the job. Then I started the job and we immediately got into sort of a re-architecture of our data platform, and I didn't really get an opportunity to leverage those new Tableau skills right away. But around the same time, I started having these ideas for some data, these sort of just personal questions I had around data, and some of them related to sports, and some were related to politics, and things that were related to religion, and just like, well, maybe I'll just go find some data and I'll use some of the tools that I have that I know to explore these and try to answer questions with them. And I thought, well, this is a great opportunity to practice Tableau, right? So around that time, I started my blog, and I started exploring these things. And I was using Tableau to embed some basic visuals in that, and that's how I kind of just started using Tableau. And I was even just using Tableau Public at that point, because it's just free platform and it allowed me to do pretty much everything. So I just continued from there. Eventually, I discovered that there was this thriving community of people, of passionate people that were using this platform and sharing ideas and writing about it, and presenting about it and doing podcasts and all this crazy thing. And at that point, I just sort of jumped in, and for the first, I say, year and a half of using Tableau, I was almost all doing just doing personal projects and building my Tableau public page and writing about things on the blog. And at some point, I just sort of transitioned over to, realizing that I had something to teach as well. So I started to transition the blog over to teaching and trying to help people to master the platform. So that's basically my Tableau journey. I became a Zen about a little over a year and a half into using Tableau, because I was just constantly on Tableau and building different things at that point. And I've just continued to grow and learn from there. I would definitely recommend checking out the blog on my website, 4 tips for mastering Tableau. So I share a little bit of my own journey, as well as some of my recommendations on things you can do to get really good at this platform. And again, I also did a presentation that was based on that, Zero to Zen. And in that one, I actually used Kevin as an example, a use case for that program that I put together, because Kevin did a very similar. Our journeys are a little bit different, but he did a very similar set of things, and got really amazing at the platform. And within a couple of years, he had become a Zen as well. So I definitely recommend checking out the blog and that presentation.
Thank you, Ken, for that. And I think it was an honor to have you on VizConnect. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing us about and sharing your knowledge about the Tableau new data model and all encouraging words. So thanks a lot for coming on VizConnect. Yeah.
Thank you for having me, Sagar.
Perfect. So with that, thank you everyone joining. Have a great weekend ahead. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week. Thank you. Take care. Bye, Kevin. Ken, sorry.
Hey, I'm used to it. No problem. Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.